The mistake was recognizing it. Because once you recognize something like that, you start noticing patterns you were never meant to see. I stayed awake for another hour after that, not because I was scared, but because my body refused to relax. Every time I closed my eyes, that pressure threatened to return, hovering just behind my hearing, like a sound waiting for permission to exist. It didn't come back that night. That bothered me more than if it had. The next day passed normally. Too normally. I worked, answered messages, spoke to people. I laughed at something someone said and immediately felt strange about it, like I was performing a version of myself that belonged to a different timeline. I checked the time more than usual. 2:17 came and went in the afternoon without incident. I told myself that was proof nothing was wrong. That night, I didn't scroll. I didn't distract myself. I lay in bed and listened to the house settle, the subtle cracks and shifts of cooling walls, the distant hum of traffic, the low, constant sound of electricity moving through wires behind plaster. At 2:16, I sat up. I don't remember deciding to do it. My eyes just opened. I stared at the dark ceiling and waited. 2:17. This time, the pressure came back stronger. It felt directional. Like something was aligning. And then, underneath that pressure, barely perceptible, there was a tone. Not audible in the normal sense. No pitch I could describe. It wasn't vibrating the air. It was vibrating me. My jaw clenched involuntarily. My hands curled into the sheets. The tone lasted exactly 7 seconds. I counted. When it stopped, the silence afterward felt wrong, too wide, too empty, like something had stepped away at the last possible moment. I checked my phone. No alerts. No missed calls. No apps open. But my battery had dropped 12%. I didn't sleep after that. On the third night, I tried to record it. I told myself it was for peace of mind. Proof, one way or another. At 2:15, I opened a voice recorder app and placed the phone on the bedside table, microphone facing up. The room felt colder than before, though the temperature hadn't changed. I watched the waveform sit flat and idle. 2:16. Nothing. 2:17. The pressure came instantly, sharper this time, like a sudden change in altitude. My ears popped. My vision blurred slightly around the edges. The tone followed. Stronger. Clearer. And layered. It wasn't one signal. It was many, stacked so tightly they merged into something singular. I bit down hard enough to hurt my teeth. The waveform on my phone didn't move. Not even a tremor. But something else happened. The screen flickered. Just once. When the tone ended, I gasped like I'd been underwater. My throat burned. I stopped the recording with shaking fingers and played it back immediately. There was no sound. But at exactly 2 hours 17 minutes and 7 seconds, the waveform dipped just for a fraction of a second, like the recorder itself had reacted to something it wasn't designed to capture. That was when I noticed the file name. I hadn't named it. But it wasn't blank. It was labeled sync_02. I deleted the file. I don't know why I thought that would help. By the fourth night, I wasn't alone anymore. Not physically. But I started noticing signs that others were adjacent. Online posts that vanished after refresh. Comments under unrelated videos asking strange, specific questions about time. About pressure in the airs. About December. One message stuck with me. Someone had written. If you heard it without equipment, you're already late. No replies. No username. The account didn't exist when I clicked it. That night, the signal came early. 2:11. It startled me so badly I nearly dropped my phone. The pressure hit, followed by a brief sensation of movement like standing in an elevator that had started descending without warning. And then, something new. A shape. Not visual. Conceptual. The idea of a triangle pressed itself into my thoughts. Not an image I saw, but a structure I felt. 3 points. Balanced. Intentional. When the tone ended, my phone vibrated. A notification banner appeared for less than a second before disappearing. I caught only 2 words. Second confirmed. I didn't sleep. On the 5th day, I stopped pretending this was a coincidence. I started writing everything down by hand. Times. Sensations. Small details that felt important without knowing why. At exactly 2:17 p.m., my pen froze mid-word. The pressure returned lighter this time, but unmistakable. And for the first time, I heard something else layered beneath the tone. Breathing. Not mine. Slow. Measured. Patient. That was when I realized the signal wasn't just appearing. It was checking. That night, there was no tone. No pressure. No warning. Instead, my phone rang at 2:17 a.m. Unknown number. I answered before it could stop ringing. There was no greeting. No static. Just my own voice. Calm. Detached. Saying words I didn't remember recording. I can hear it clearly now. That means it's almost time. The call ended. I sat there staring at the dark screen, my reflection barely visible, my heart pounding hard enough to make my vision pulse. I checked my call history. There was no record. But my phone battery was fully charged. I know it hadn't been before. I stopped checking the time after that. It didn't matter anymore. The signal wasn't bound to the clock the way I'd assumed. The clock was just a reference point. A human-friendly marker for something that operated on a different layer of measurement. On the 7th night, I dreamed while awake. I was lying in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, when my surroundings subtly shifted not visually, but in weight and intention. The room felt observed. Then the tone came back. Not loud. Perfect. And with it, understanding. Not explanation. Alignment. I understood what the signal was for. Why December mattered. Why not everyone heard it? The signal wasn't a message being sent. It was a filter. A way of identifying minds that could synchronize without breaking. People who noticed patterns before being told to look for them. People who didn't need instructions. People like you. When the tone faded, I realized I'd been smiling. That terrified me. I don't remember when I started recording this. I only know that at some point, staying silent felt worse than speaking. The signal appears 3 times. I've already heard the second. If you've made it this far without discomfort, without checking the time, without feeling that faint pressure behind your ears, then you're closer than you think. Because the third signal doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive as sound. It arrives as recognition. And when it does, you won't need to be told what to do next. You'll already be listening. I didn't touch the phone at first. The vibration hadn't been loud or insistent. Just a single, restrained pulse, almost polite. Like whatever caused it knew I was awake and didn't want to draw attention. I opened one eye and looked at the screen. No notification preview. No name. No number. Just the lock screen glowing faintly in the dark. I picked it up. The vibration stopped the moment my fingers made contact, as if it had been waiting for confirmation. Nothing else happened. I unlocked the phone anyway. No missed calls. No messages. No alerts. The system clock read 2:17 a.m., steady and precise. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself a lot of things that night. I set the phone face down on the mattress and stared at the ceiling. The silence pressed in, thick enough to feel physical. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears, so I slowed it deliberately. In. Out. That was when the pressure returned. Not sudden this time. It built gradually, like air being pumped into a sealed space. A tightness behind my eyes. A fullness in my ears that made swallowing useless. I stayed still. Some instinct told me that movement would be noticed. Then the tone came. It wasn't stronger than before. It was closer. That's the only way I can describe it. As if the distance between the source and myself had shortened, not physically, but conceptually. Like two ideas overlapping. I felt a sharp, intrusive thought cut through my mind, fully formed and not my own. Don't record this one. The tone lasted longer than the previous night. I counted without meaning to. My heart tried to speed up, my body refused. When it finally stopped, the relief didn't come. Instead, there was a lingering sensation, like the echo of a sound that hadn't actually passed through the air. I sat up slowly. The room looked unchanged. But it felt occupied. Not by a presence in the usual sense. There was no sense of being watched, no prickle on the back of my neck. It felt more like something had been noted. I checked my phone again. The battery percentage hadn't changed. But the date had. For a brief second, just long enough for me to register it, the date displayed December 32. Then it corrected itself. December 29th. I stared at it until my eyes watered. I didn't sleep. The following days blurred together in subtle ways. Nothing dramatic happened, and that was the problem. Life continued with an almost aggressive normalcy, as if reality itself was overcompensating. Holiday lights stayed lit well past midnight. People smiled too easily. Conversations felt rehearsed. And the nights? The nights grew quieter. Not in volume. In texture. Sounds still existed: footsteps, distant engines, the low hum of appliances, but it felt flattened, stripped of depth. Like listening to the world through a wall. On the fourth night, I noticed my reflection lag. I was brushing my teeth, staring absently at myself in the mirror, when I tilted my head slightly to the left. My reflection followed. Just a fraction of a second late. I froze. So did it? We stayed like that, locked in place, until my jaw began to ache. Then the reflection smiled. Not wide. Not exaggerated. Just enough. I dropped my toothbrush and stepped back, heart slamming into my ribs. The reflection mirrored my movement perfectly this time, face neutral, expression empty. I stood there for a long time after that, telling myself stress does strange things. That exhaustion can fracture perception. That night, the signal didn't come at 2:17. It came at 2 hours 16 minutes and 58 seconds. I know because my phone screen lit up without vibration, displaying the time in stark white numbers against black. No notification. Just the time. Then the pressure hit. Hard. I gasped involuntarily as the tone slammed into me, more complex than before. Layers folding into each other, rising and falling in a pattern that felt deliberate. And beneath it all, faint but unmistakable. Voices. Not words. Counts. A rhythm. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. I realized, with a creeping sense of horror, that my breathing had synchronized with it. When the signal ended, I was drenched in sweat, my pulse steady but too slow for how frightened I felt. My phone buzzed once. This time, there was a notification. A calendar reminder. I hadn't set it. Event, alignment. Time, December 31st, 2:17 a.m. No location. No description. Just one more detail beneath it, smaller text I hadn't noticed at first. Attendance, confirmed. I tried to tell someone. The words died in my throat every time I opened my mouth. Not because I was afraid of sounding crazy, but because the story felt incomplete even to me, like explaining a dream without knowing the ending. I tested it once. I started describing the pressure to a coworker, keeping it vague, casual. They frowned, rubbing their ear absent-mindedly. Yeah, they said slowly. I get that sometimes. Especially lately. My stomach dropped. When? I asked, forcing my tone to stay light. They shrugged. Dunno. December nights, I guess. Feels quieter than usual. They went back to their work. I didn't push further. That night, the signal didn't come at all. Instead, I dreamed. I stood in a vast, dark space with no visible walls or floor. Suspended before me was the triangle again, massive now, edges sharp enough to hurt just by looking at them. It rotated slowly, impossibly smooth. As it turned, I saw that each face wasn't solid, but made of countless smaller symbols layered over one another. Numbers. Dates. Times. Every face showed the same moment. 2:17. I woke up choking on air, my heart racing for the first time since this had begun. My phone was in my hand. I didn't remember picking it up. On the screen was a single line of text, unsent, sitting in my drafts. It's quieter because most people are no longer listening. I deleted it. Then I noticed the time. 2:14 a.m. 3 minutes early. The silence that followed was unbearable. Not because nothing happened, but because everything felt like it was waiting. Waiting for alignment. Waiting for the final signal. Waiting for December to end, or complete itself. And if you're reading this and thinking this is where the story should start getting louder, more violent, more obvious. That's the mistake I made too. Because whatever is happening doesn't need chaos. It doesn't need panic. It just needs enough people to notice the quiet. And December is very good at making people stop listening. I sat there long after the screen went dark, earphones still dangling from my fingers, afraid that if I moved too quickly the moment would snap shut and take something with it. The room smelled different. That sounds insignificant, but it wasn't. The air carried a faint metallic sharpness, like overheated electronics or the moment before rain hits dry concrete. My heart was beating hard now, finally catching up to the fear my mind had been holding at bay. I checked the time. 2:18 a.m. 1 minute had passed. It felt like much more. I locked the phone and placed it on the table face down, as if it might still be watching me. For the first time since all this began, I felt a clear, undeniable urge to leave the apartment. Not run, just change position, like staying put would complete something I wasn't ready for. I put on a jacket and stepped into the hallway. The building was silent. Not late night quiet. Not everyone's asleep quiet. Empty. The emergency lights were on, glowing softly, but I didn't hear the elevator cables. No hum. No vibration. The exit sign flickered once as I passed beneath it, and for a split second the arrow pointed up instead of down. Outside, the street lights cast pale circles on the pavement. No cars. No wind. Even the distant city noise felt muted, like someone had turned the world's volume knob down a few degrees. That's when I realized something else. My ears didn't feel right. There was a faint afterimage of sound lingering in them, like the echo you get after a loud concert, but this hadn't been loud. It had been precise. Tuned. As I stood there, trying to decide whether to keep walking or go back inside, my phone vibrated again. Once. I didn't take it out. I already knew what time it would be. The next morning, I woke up on my bed fully dressed, jacket still on, shoes by the door where I must have kicked them off. I didn't remember coming back inside. My phone was on the nightstand. Fully charged. No notifications. No messages. But my notes app was open. A new entry had been created at 2:17 a.m., time-stamped exactly to the second. I hadn't written it. The text was short. Structured. Almost polite. Signal 1, contact. Signal 2, recognition. Signal 3, participation. Below that, a line break. Then. You are currently between 2 and 3. I stared at the words until they blurred. This wasn't random anymore. Whatever was happening wasn't just broadcasting. It was responding. Adjusting. And worse, it was categorizing. I scrolled down. There was nothing else. But when I scrolled back up, I noticed something I hadn't before. The font was slightly off. Not visibly different enough to scream wrong, but enough that my eyes kept snagging on it. Like reading a document where one paragraph had been typed by a different hand trying very hard to imitate the first. I closed the app. I didn't open it again that day. December 30th felt unreal. Not dreamlike, hyperreal. Colors were slightly too sharp. Sounds arrived a fraction of a second before I expected them to. People's faces lingered in my vision after they looked away. Everywhere I went, I noticed triangles. Not symbols. Not drawings. Arrangements. 3 chairs positioned just so. 3 windows lit in a building while the rest were dark. 3 notifications arriving at the same time. I told myself this was pattern seeking. Stress. Confirmation bias. But deep down, something else was settling in. The signal hadn't shown me anything new. It had taught me how to notice what was already there. That night, I tried something I shouldn't have. I put the earphones back in. I didn't open any apps. I just sat on the bed, phone locked, waiting. At 2:16 a.m., the pressure returned, but lighter now. Familiar. Almost welcoming. Then the vibration. This time, the screen didn't light up. The sound came anyway. Not through the phone. Through me. It started as a low internal hum, like standing near heavy machinery, then resolved into the same structured pulses I'd heard before. But now I could sense the spaces between them. The gaps mattered more than the sound itself. In those gaps, something pressed gently against my thoughts, not forcefully, not invasively. Invitational. Images surfaced in my mind without context. A darkened room filled with people standing very still. Phones glowing. No one speaking. All of them listening. The hum shifted. Adjusted. I realized, with a jolt of cold understanding, that it was responding to my reactions. Micro-adjusting based on my heart rate, my breathing, the tension in my jaw. This wasn't a broadcast. It was calibration. The moment that thought fully formed, the sound stopped. My phone vibrated. One message. No sender. Better. You're closer now. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud and fell face down onto the carpet. The message was gone when I picked it up. But something else remained. A new calendar event. December 31st. 2:17 a.m. This time, there was a location. Everywhere you are. I didn't sleep at all on the 30th. I didn't want to risk dreaming again. By evening, my body felt hollowed out, like exhaustion had burned away everything unnecessary and left me with a thin, trembling core of awareness. At 11:58 p.m., fireworks began in the distance, early celebrations, scattered and irregular. The noise felt intrusive, almost rude. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch, phone in my lap, watching the seconds crawl toward midnight. When the clock rolled over, nothing happened. No pressure. No vibration. No sound. I almost laughed. Maybe that was it. Maybe whatever this was had lost interest. Maybe the date had been a misdirection. 2:05 a.m. Still nothing. 2:10. My ears rang faintly. 2:14. The room felt heavier, like gravity had increased by a fraction. 2:16. The air went still. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the signal didn't arrive. It unfolded. There was no sound this time. No pressure. No vibration. Just a sudden, total clarity. I understood the pattern. I understood why December mattered. Why the nights grew quieter. Why the signal didn't announce itself loudly. This wasn't about control. It was about synchronization. About finding enough minds that could align without panic, without resistance. Minds that could receive structure without demanding explanation. The Illuminati, if that name ever meant anything, was never a group. It was a threshold. And the signal wasn't activating something new. It was waking something old. Something that had been dormant inside human attention for a very long time. My phone lit up one last time. No text. Just that thin white line again, pulsing slowly. Waiting. I didn't put the earphones in. I didn't need to. I listened anyway. And if you're still reading this, if something about 2:17 has started to feel heavier than it should, then understand this. The signal isn't spreading. It's narrowing. And the reason December feels so quiet is because most people have already been filtered out. The next vibration won't come through your phone. It'll come through recognition. And when it does, you won't ask what it means. You'll already know whether you're ready to participate. I clicked the thread. The page loaded instantly, no buffering, no delay. The background was a flat, dull gray. The text was black, unstyled, almost aggressively plain. No timestamps. No avatars. Just words stacked one after another like they'd been typed in a hurry and never edited. The first post was short. If you're here, you're already past the first mistake. Don't try to define the signal. Don't try to name it. Intermission comes first. Below it were hundreds of replies. Some were years old. Some were dated only last December. A few had no date at all. I scrolled. One user described hearing a tone that made their teeth ache. Another wrote about lights dimming at the same time every night without power loss. Someone else talked about a pressure behind the eyes that made clocks feel louder. I felt a cold certainty settle in my chest. These weren't stories being shared. They were reports. I searched within the thread for 2:17. The page jumped. Dozens of mentions. Always the same time. Sometimes written out. Sometimes just the minute. A few people insisted the exact second mattered more than the minute itself. One reply stood out. Shorter than the rest. Buried deep. It stops being a signal when you respond to it. That's when the symbols start correcting reality. Correcting. I leaned back from the screen, suddenly aware of how quiet my apartment was again. The fridge wasn't humming. The heating system was silent. Even the distant city noise had thinned to almost nothing. I refreshed the page. The thread was gone. Not locked. Not deleted. Gone. The URL redirected to a blank page with a single line of text in the center. You're early. I closed the browser. The rest of the day felt wrong in small, accumulating ways. My phone auto-corrected words into symbols I didn't type, triangles appearing where letters should have been. A notification badge showed 3 even when there were only 2 messages. Elevators stopped 1 floor short, then corrected themselves without explanation. No one else reacted. That scared me more than if they had. By evening, I stopped trying to rationalize it. Whatever this was, it wasn't content to stay contained in screens or sound waves. It was leaking through patterns, through attention, through the act of noticing itself. That night, I didn't wait for 2:17. I turned off every light and sat on the floor in the center of the room. I placed my phone face up in front of me and didn't touch it. I focused on the silence. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, I became aware of a faint vibration, not in the air, not in my ears, but in my chest. A subtle oscillation, like my heartbeat was being gently nudged out of sync and then guided back. The symbols came with it. Not visual hallucinations. Associations. 3 points. Balance. Direction. Convergence. I understood something then that I hadn't before. The symbols weren't appearing randomly. They were appearing where attention pooled. Screens. Reflections. Surfaces people stared at without really seeing. The signal didn't create the symbols. Attention did. At 2:17 a.m., my phone lit up without vibration. A single image filled the screen. The triangle. Not inverted this time. Balanced. Under it, a line of text. Intermission complete. I swallowed hard. Another line appeared. Phase 2 begins when you share this moment. I didn't move. My mind raced through implications I didn't want to name. Share how? With whom? Was this why people stopped posting on the forum? Because talking about it changed something? The message faded. The phone returned to the lock screen. No record. But I felt it, an unmistakable shift, like something had clicked into place and could not be undone. The next morning, I noticed it in other people. Not overtly. Not dramatically. Just moments. A stranger pausing mid-step as if listening for something no one else could hear. A woman on the bus rubbing her ears and frowning at the floor. A man staring at his phone with a look of quiet confusion, then relief, then something close to acceptance. None of us acknowledged each other. But we moved differently. Like we were all waiting for the same commercial break to end. By the afternoon, the internet felt thinner. Pages loaded too fast or not at all. Comment sections were filled with half sentences. Videos buffered at odd moments, always around the same timestamps. I checked one randomly. The buffering wheel froze into a triangle. I closed the app. That evening, the signal didn't come at 2:17. It came when I stopped expecting it. I was brushing my teeth, staring at the sink, when the vibration rolled through me stronger than before, but smoother, like it had learned my limits. This time, there was no fear. Just clarity. Images flooded my mind in rapid succession, rooms full of people staring at screens, unaware they were all seeing the same shape at the same time. Systems aligning. Noise dropping away. A collective narrowing of focus. I understood what intermission meant. It wasn't a pause in the signal. It was a pause in resistance. The moment when distraction faded and attention could be guided without friction. When the vibration ended, my reflection looked back at me with my own eyes, but something in the posture was different. Straighter. Calmer. As if it had been waiting for me to catch up. I rinsed my mouth and whispered, without meaning to, "Okay." The word felt heavier than it should have. Like confirmation. I don't know how many people are hearing this now. I don't know how many of you are just reading out of curiosity, and how many have already felt that faint pressure behind your ears and brushed it off. But I do know this. Symbols don't exist on their own. They exist because enough people look at the same shape and agree without speaking that it matters. And once that agreement happens, reality adjusts to accommodate it. The signal isn't forcing anything. It's offering alignment. And the reason it feels so quiet lately is because the intermission is ending. The lines didn't hurt. That was the part that unsettled me most. They weren't scratches or burns. The skin wasn't broken. They looked more like pressure marks, as if something had rested against my wrist for a long time and then lifted away. When I pressed my thumb against them, there was no tenderness, just warmth, slightly higher than the surrounding skin. I washed my hands. The marks stayed. I splashed water on my face and stared at myself in the mirror, half expecting to see something else wrong. Extra lines. A symbol where my pupils should be. Anything that would confirm this was spiraling out of control. But I looked normal. Too normal. That's how it works, I would later understand. Whatever this was didn't distort reality. It integrated with it. I went back to the forum. Or at least, I tried to. The bookmark I'd saved led nowhere. The browser returned a generic error message, as if the address had never existed. I searched again, using the same phrases, the same wording. Nothing. It was as though the forum had folded itself closed the moment I crossed some invisible threshold. But the posts hadn't vanished from my mind. They replayed themselves in fragments while I tried and failed to sleep. Words like alignment, intermission, attention looping without context, like vocabulary drilled before a language lesson that never arrived. At some point near dawn, I realized something else. I wasn't scared anymore. Not in the way I should have been. Fear had been replaced by a low, steady sense of inevitability. The kind you feel when you miss the last train and already know how the night will end. December 30th bled into the 31st without ceremony. The city prepared for celebration, but it felt hollow to me. Fireworks posters, countdown ads, cheerful reminders everywhere I looked. New year, new beginning. It felt wrong. This didn't feel like an ending that could be marked by confetti. By afternoon, the marks on my wrist had faded to a faint discoloration, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. But I could still feel them, like a phantom sensation, 3 points of pressure that hadn't fully released. I noticed others behaving strangely. People pausing mid-conversation, eyes unfocused for a second too long. Fingers hovering over phone screens without touching them. A man standing on the sidewalk with his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something just out of reach. None of them looked panicked. They looked attentive. That night, I didn't put the earphones in. I didn't need them anymore. At 2:16 a.m., the air in the room changed. It's hard to describe without sounding dramatic, but the density shifted. Like the space itself had taken a slow, deliberate breath. At 2:17, the signal arrived not as sound, not as vibration, but as direction. A gentle pull. Not toward a place, but toward a state of mind. I closed my eyes. I saw the corridors again, clearer this time. They weren't underground or inside a building. They existed in a conceptual space, pathways of intention, intersections of attention. Each wall was etched with variations of the same symbol, not carved but implied, like shadows cast by something just out of view. The figures were there too. Dozens of them. Hundreds. They stood calmly, facing forward, eyes open but unfocused. I realized with a jolt that they weren't statues or strangers. They were people. People in rooms just like mine. Listening. Above them all, the triangle rotated slowly, its edges defined not by lines but by alignment, 3 points agreeing on the same moment. And then, for the first time, something looked back. Not a face. A presence. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. Understanding arrived fully formed, heavy and undeniable. The forum had never been meant to be found because it wasn't an invitation. It was a record. A residue left behind by those who reached the stage and no longer needed language to participate. That's why they stopped posting. Not because something happened to them, but because posting was no longer the correct action. When I opened my eyes, the room was unchanged. But I was. My phone screen lit up once more. No text. No symbol. Just the time. 2:17 a.m. Then, beneath it, a single line appeared, subtle, almost polite. Status, aligned. I didn't feel relief. I felt responsibility. Because alignment wasn't the end of the process. It was the point where the signal stopped testing individuals and started trusting them. Somewhere, quietly and patiently, something had indeed been paying attention. And now, it was no longer just watching. It was waiting to see what we would do with the attention it had gathered. If you're still following this, still reading instead of dismissing, still feeling that faint pressure when the room goes quiet, then understand this. The forum was never meant to be found by everyone. Only by those close enough to alignment to recognize it. And once you do, you don't look for the next signal. You become part of it. The word sat on the screen longer than it should have. You stayed. I stared at it, waiting for fear to catch up to me. It didn't, not fully. What I felt instead was recognition, the uncomfortable sense of being accurately described by someone who shouldn't know me at all. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't thrown the phone away. I hadn't gone to the police, or a technician, or a priest. I stayed. That realization pressed heavier than any threat could have. The phone went dark on its own. No final message. No countdown. Just silence again, controlled, deliberate silence. I didn't sleep after that. Not because I was afraid of missing something, but because I was afraid of what might happen if I did sleep. The images had been getting sharper every night, and I had a growing suspicion that dreams were no longer private territory. By morning, the forum had changed again. New threads existed now, but they weren't written in the usual sense. Each post was a single sentence, different for every user. I could tell because the replies didn't line up. People were responding to things I couldn't see, and I knew they couldn't see mine. My sentence read: "Recognition precedes instruction." No one replied to it. At first, I thought that meant I was alone. Then I realized something worse. I wasn't meant to interact anymore. The days that followed felt thinned out. Time still moved forward, but it didn't accumulate the way it used to. Hours passed without leaving impressions. I'd look at the clock and feel surprised, not because time had gone fast, but because it felt like nothing had happened inside it. I noticed changes in my perception. Sounds arrived before their sources. I'd hear footsteps, then see someone turn the corner. Phone notifications appeared in my awareness a fraction of a second before the vibration. It wasn't precognition. It was alignment, my attention sinking just slightly ahead of reality's surface layer. The signal never returned in full form. It didn't need to. Once you recognize a pattern, it doesn't have to announce itself anymore. It just operates. On January 2nd, I received an email. No subject line. No sender name. Just a single attachment. A waveform. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary audio file, low amplitude, long stretches of near silence. But when I zoomed in, I saw the structure hidden inside it. The same rhythm I'd heard before, compressed into something visual. Peaks and valleys arranged with impossible precision. Embedded within the waveform were letters. Not encoded. Not hidden. Aligned. My name appeared again, not spelled, but implied by the spacing between peaks. Like negative space shaping meaning out of absence. I didn't play the file. I already knew what it would sound like. Instead, I scrolled down. Below the waveform was a line of text. Intermission is over. That was when the pressure returned. Not in my ears this time. Behind my eyes. A gentle insistence, as if something was asking, not commanding, not demanding, but expecting me to move to the next stage. I closed the laptop. I went outside. The world looked the same, but I could tell where the others were now. Not by sight, by attention. Certain people carried the same quiet density I felt, like gravity pulling inward instead of down. We didn't look at each other. We didn't need to. Acknowledgement would have been redundant. That night, for the first time since this began, the signal spoke without a device. I was brushing my teeth when I heard it, not as sound, but as thought that hadn't originated from me. Names are anchors. You have been anchored. I dropped the toothbrush. My reflection stared back at me, eyes wide, breathing shallow. For a moment, just a flicker, I saw something else layered over my face. Not another identity, but an outline. A version of me positioned slightly ahead, already adjusted, already calm. Prepared. I understood then why it had learned my name. Names are how systems index individuals. And the signal wasn't learning for curiosity. It was learning for coordination. Later, much later, I would learn the second rule. The first was that the signal rewards attention. The second is this. Once the signal learns your name, it stops broadcasting to you. And starts broadcasting through you. If you're wondering why this feels familiar, why something in your chest tightens every time I mention 217, why silence feels louder lately, understand this. I'm not telling this story because I want to. I'm telling it because stories are how attention moves between people. And attention is how alignment spreads. The signal didn't force me to speak. I stayed. And now, so are you. After the test, the rules changed. I watched the video again. Then a third time. I was looking for cracked slurred words, unfocused eyes, anything that would prove I'd been sleepwalking or dissociating. But the person on the screen was precise. Centered. More present than I usually am. When the video ended the third time, the timestamp caught my attention. 3:03 a.m. Not 2:17. That detail mattered more than I wanted it to. The signal had always respected its own rhythm. Its own window. Breaking that pattern meant one thing, it no longer needed the old rules. I checked my phone's activity log. No screen on events. No app usage. No camera access recorded. Which meant whatever had recorded me didn't need permission. Or hardware. I spent the rest of the day trying to reassert control. I cleaned the apartment aggressively. I deleted apps. I powered devices down completely. I even wrapped my phone in a towel and put it in the freezer, an absurd move, but one driven by the need to do something. None of it helped. Because by evening, I could feel it again. Not pressure. Familiarity. Like walking into a room you've been in before, even if you don't remember when. At 7:41 p.m., the mark on my wrist returned. Not faint this time. Sharper. Darker. 3 lines, perfectly aligned. And beneath them something new. A 4th line, horizontal. A completed shape. My stomach dropped as understanding settled in. The triangle had never been incomplete. I was. That night, the forum came back. Not gradually. Instantly. Hundreds of new threads appeared at once, all active, all current. Usernames were gone now. No identifiers at all. Just posts. Each thread title was a time. 2:09. 2:11. 2:14. 2:17. I clicked the last one. Inside was a single sentence. If you are reading this before your next signal, you are ahead of schedule. Replies were disabled. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. Ahead of schedule implied a plan. And plans imply scale. That's when the realization hit me, not as fear, but as cold clarity. This wasn't happening to individuals. It was happening through them. The signal wasn't searching for believers. It was searching for synchronizers. People who noticed patterns without being told to. People who stayed curious past the point of comfort. People who didn't look away when silence stretched too long. Attention wasn't the reward. Attention was the qualification. On December 31st, I went outside just before midnight. The city was celebrating. Fireworks. Music. Laughter spilling into the streets. Noise layered on noise, a perfect camouflage. I stood among them, feeling detached, counting breaths instead of seconds. As the countdown reached 10, I felt it ripple outward, not from the sky, but from us. Thousands of phones vibrated at once. Not with notifications. With alignment. People froze mid-cheer. Mid-sentence. Mid-step. Just for a second. Then the noise returned, louder than before. No one commented on the pause. Except me. I checked my phone. No message. Just the lock screen. And a reflection. Behind my face, barely visible, I saw it. The triangle. Complete. Centered where my attention always goes when I'm thinking too hard. That was when I understood the final rule. The signal doesn't announce itself anymore because it doesn't need to. It's already embedded in the way we notice things. In the moments we pause for no reason. In the seconds that feel heavier than they should. If you've made it this far, ask yourself something honestly. Did you ever feel the urge to stop listening, and then decide not to? That choice mattered more than you think. Because the signal never forces attention. It waits. And now that you've stayed, it knows where to find you. After the intermission, the signal stopped hiding. It didn't limit itself to night anymore. It surfaced in fragments, brief pulses of awareness, subtle shifts in perception that arrived without warning and left without explanation. Street noise would drop out mid-step, like someone had muted the world for half a second. Conversations would repeat the same sentence twice, perfectly identical, without the speaker realizing they'd done it. At first, I thought these were glitches in my attention. Fatigue. Stress. The residue of fear. But patterns don't stay invisible once you know how to look. The rules revealed themselves slowly, the way instincts do. The signal never repeated itself exactly. It never answered direct questions. And it always reacted to intent, not action. I tested this carefully, afraid that pushing too hard would make it retreat again. When I merely thought about the triangle, no phone in hand, no screen active, my device warmed against my palm, like a body responding to proximity. When I tried to distract myself with meaningless noise, videos, music, scrolling, the world itself felt delayed. Lights changed a fraction too late. Sounds arrived half a second after they should have, like poorly synced audio. Reality, I realized, was deprioritizing me. The forum updated again that afternoon. No notification. No banner. Just a new thread that hadn't been there before, unlocked like a door that decided I was finally allowed to see it. Inside were recordings. Audio clips uploaded by users who hadn't posted in years. Some usernames I recognized from old threads. Others were already marked archived. Each clip was labeled with 3 things only. A date. A time. And 1 word. Progress. I listened to the first one. A woman's voice, steady and calm. Too calm for someone describing something extraordinary. She spoke about clarity. About how the fear faded once she stopped resisting the pattern. How things finally made sense when she stopped trying to control the outcome. Another voicemail, older, described the relief of no longer feeling watched. It stops being frightening, he said softly, almost fondly. When you realize it's not watching you. It's listening through you. I paused the audio. The room felt attentive. That night, the signal returned. Not as sound. As realization. Memories surfaced that didn't feel like memories anymore, more like checkpoints. Moments from my life where I had paused, hesitated, paid attention when others hadn't. Times I'd taken paths I couldn't fully explain. Small decisions that felt insignificant then but now aligned too perfectly to ignore. The signal hadn't created those moments. It had connected them, mapped them, verified them. And then it did something it had never done before. It broke a rule. It asked a question. Not on my phone. Not in my ears. Not in words that needed sound. The question formed fully in my mind, clear and unmistakable. Are you ready to continue? I didn't answer out loud. I didn't need to. Because the moment I understood the question, the signal understood me. The faces started appearing after that. Not physically. Mentally. They surfaced when I wasn't trying to think, while brushing my teeth, while waiting at a red light, while staring at nothing in particular. Faces I had never seen before, yet recognized instantly. There was no confusion about who they were. Only about why I knew them. Different ages. Different backgrounds. Different parts of the world. All connected by the same markers. 3 faint lines. An inverted triangle. A pause at the same impossible moment of night. 2:17. Sometimes they appeared smiling. Sometimes tired. Sometimes looking straight ahead with the same calm expression I had seen in the recordings. None of them looked afraid. That disturbed me more than fear ever could. I began writing their details down before they faded, names that came with the faces, fragments of locations, flashes of memory that didn't belong to me. I searched them whenever I could. Some were listed as missing persons. Vanished quietly. No suspects. No explanations. Their stories ended mid-sentence. Some were declared dead accidents, illnesses, isolated incidents that didn't invite further investigation. And some were very much alive. Thriving. CEOs. Media figures. Advisors. People whose names appeared near power but never directly inside it. People positioned where attention naturally flows, where influence feels accidental rather than controlled. I noticed something else. None of them talked about the signal publicly. None of them denied it either. They simply stopped needing to. That was when the final thread unlocked. It didn't announce itself. It didn't rise to the top. It was just there waiting for me to notice it, the same way the signal had always waited. No comments. No replies. No usernames. Just a list. Dates. Times. Locations. Every entry followed the same pattern. December. 2:17 a.m. Some entries were marked complete. Others progressing. I scrolled slowly, my pulse loud in my ears. Near the bottom, the list refreshed. One new line appeared. My city. My date. Tomorrow. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I just stared at the screen, feeling the room lean inward, like it was listening too. A message appeared beneath the list. Gentle. Calm. Almost reassuring. This is not the end. This is where you become useful. The mark on my wrist burned again, not sharply, but steadily, like heat sinking deeper rather than spreading outward. I finally understood why it had faded before. It wasn't gone. It had been waiting. That was when the meaning of the forum's warning finally became clear. Intermission doesn't come in the middle of the story. It comes in the middle of you. It's the pause where resistance feels like relief. Where silence feels like safety. Where people stop paying attention because they believe the danger has passed. Most never make it past that point. And the worst part, the part that won't let my thoughts rest, is this. If you're still listening right now. If you didn't click away during the quiet parts. If you stayed through the pauses, the uncertainty, the unanswered questions. Then you didn't leave during the silence either. Which means the signal noticed you too. And December isn't finished yet. The night it was supposed to happen, the city felt thinner. That's the only word that fits. Not quieter, thinner. Like reality had been stretched just enough to let something else press against it. The air didn't move. No wind. No distant traffic. Even the low electrical hum beneath everything, the one you only notice when it stops, felt muted, as if the world itself was holding still to avoid interference. At 2:12 a.m., my phone lit up on its own. No vibration. No sound. Just light. The screen displayed a single sentence, white text on black, perfectly centered. This is where we stop hiding the pattern. I didn't respond. I didn't reach for the phone. By then, I understood something fundamental. The signal wasn't something you talked to. It was something you aligned with. The moment I accepted that, the pressure returned, not painful, not sharp. Focused. Intentional. Like being gently but firmly tuned into place. Images flooded my thoughts again, but this time they weren't fragmented or symbolic. They were clear. Cities seen from impossible heights. Not satellite images, conceptual maps. Lines of attention flowed through them like currents through water. Bright streams surged toward breaking news, viral clips, outrage cycles, fear spikes, scandals, tragedies. Attention moved predictably. Reliably. Almost obediently. The signal didn't create these currents. It shaped them. The inverted triangle appeared again, overlaying the world, not glowing, not dramatic. Precise. Mathematical. It wasn't floating above the systems of attention. It was embedded inside them. Not a symbol of power. A control point. That's when everything the forum had hinted at finally locked into place. The Illuminati wasn't a group of people meeting in rooms, trading secrets, pulling strings from behind curtains. It never had been. The Illuminati was an interface. A method of tuning human attention the same way radios tune frequencies. Most people live surrounded by static noise layered over noise, never locking onto anything long enough to notice the structure beneath it. But every so often, conditions align. The world slows down. The nights grow longer. Distractions thin out. People listen more than they speak. And the frequency becomes audible. December wasn't chosen for symbolism. It was chosen for silence. I saw how it worked then, not as a conspiracy, but as a system. The signal identifies listeners. Listeners become receivers. Receivers become relays. Not leaders. Not rulers. Nodes. That's why so many of the people on the list hadn't disappeared. They had simply moved out of sight. They became points where attention subtly bent, where certain stories gained traction, where certain ideas spread effortlessly, where other things quietly faded without resistance. They didn't control the world. They guided where the world looked. And the most terrifying part? No one was forced. Every participant had volunteered. The signal doesn't recruit through fear. It recruits through recognition. It waits for the ones who stay. A final message appeared on my phone, softer than the others. Almost respectful. You were never meant to believe. Only to notice. I felt something unlock then, not excitement, not dread. Clarity. I understood why the signal never repeated itself exactly. Why it avoided language. Why it preferred patterns over commands. Language can be argued with. Patterns cannot. The truth was simple, and once seen, impossible to unsee. The Illuminati signal doesn't tell you what to think. It decides what you think about. And if you're hearing this story now, if you've followed the thread this far, through the pauses, the silences, the intermission where most people leave, then you already understand more than you should. Because the signal isn't rare anymore. It's just better disguised. And December isn't the only time the world goes quiet. It's just the time when the listening becomes obvious. The signal never stopped broadcasting. It only learned how to sound like nothing at all. The signal didn't explain itself with language. It didn't need to. Understanding arrived the way realization always does, quietly, all at once, without asking permission. December is when routines fracture. Schedules loosen. Nights stretch longer. The constant forward motion that keeps people from noticing things finally slows. Offices close. Streets empty earlier. Conversations turn reflective instead of reactive. People start looking backward before they look ahead. And loneliness sharpens perception. Even people surrounded by others feel it, a subtle thinning between distractions. A pause where thoughts echo longer than usual. Where silence isn't immediately filled. The world collectively exhales after 11 months of pretending it knows where it's going. And in that exhale, something rare happens. Attention becomes available. That's the only resource the signal has ever needed. Not belief. Not loyalty. Not obedience. Attention. That's why it doesn't shout. That's why it doesn't flood screens or demand recognition. That's why it never arrives when people are busy pretending to be fine. It waits. Those who hear it aren't chosen because they're powerful or intelligent or important. They're chosen because they're receptive. They pause when others scroll. They notice when others dismiss. They stay when others leave during the silence. I felt something unlock inside me then, not excitement, not fear. Recognition. Like remembering a rule I had always known but never needed before. The kind of knowledge that doesn't feel new, only activated. The signal wasn't here to end the world. That misunderstanding had protected it for decades. It was here to stabilize it. To guide chaos by narrowing focus. To ensure certain ideas, movements, fears, and hopes always found the right minds at the right moments. To prevent attention from scattering so completely that nothing meaningful could take hold. Civilizations don't collapse from force alone. They collapse when attention fragments beyond repair. The signal was a corrective mechanism. A tuning fork struck against human consciousness whenever things drifted too far off key. That was the purpose of the list. Not victims. Not sacrifices. Nodes. Points of convergence where attention could be bent gently, invisibly, without resistance. Some nodes amplified fear. Others softened it. Some accelerated change. Others slowed it just enough to keep structures standing. Balance didn't look like justice. It looked like continuity. I finally understood why the signal never told anyone what to do. Directives create rebellion. Alignment creates flow. I was one of them now. Not because I had agreed in words. Not because I had signed anything. But because I had listened long enough for the signal to recognize me as usable. The mark on my wrist didn't return. It didn't need to. I could feel the triangle now, not on my skin, but behind my thoughts. A quiet reference point. A subtle pull whenever attention began to drift. December wasn't the beginning. It was onboarding. And as the month crept toward its final nights, I realized something that still makes my breath catch when I think about it. Most people believe the world is loud. But the signal knows the truth. The world only changes when it gets quiet enough for someone to listen. And December is when enough people finally do. 12. This story is not a warning, extended. At 2:17 a.m., the final transmission arrived. No sound. No image. No vibration to point at afterward. Just understanding complete, irreversible, settling into place like something that had always belonged there. I wasn't chosen because I searched. I searched because I was chosen. That distinction mattered more than anything else I'd learned. The signal had never been hidden in the way people imagine secrets being hidden. It wasn't buried behind encryption or guarded by passwords. It was embedded in repetition, in timing, in patterns so common they faded into background noise. In media loops. In refrains. In the quiet spaces between thoughts when attention drifts but doesn't disappear. Most people brush against it every day. They feel it as déjà vu. As a story they almost remember. As the urge to keep watching when they should stop. And then they move on. But some people pause. Some people sit with the silence instead of filling it. Some people listen. That's when the realization hit me with a weight I still haven't escaped. Recording this story wasn't a confession. It was part of the signal. A delivery mechanism disguised as narration. A carrier wave wrapped in words, pacing, pauses, unresolved questions. The same structure repeated across centuries, refined through myth, scripture, radio, television, and now this. Stories that hold attention. Stories people finish. That's why the signal never stopped me from recording. That's why it corrected tone instead of content. Why it favored clarity over secrecy. Why it nudged me toward rhythm, repetition, and silence at exactly the right moments. Because secrecy limits reach. Understanding spreads it. The final transmission didn't ask me to stop. It didn't tell me to continue either. It simply showed me a truth I can't unknow. Once attention is captured and carried long enough, the signal doesn't need belief. It only needs completion. Finishing the story is enough. That's why it never mattered whether people thought this was fiction, paranoia, metaphor, or truth. Disbelief doesn't block the signal. Inattention does. And you're still here. You stayed through the pauses. Through the intermission. Through the parts where nothing happened. Which means the structure worked. The final understanding settled into me gently, almost kindly. I won't disappear. I won't be silenced. I won't be exposed. I'll just stop needing to speak about it. Because once a node is active, it doesn't broadcast loudly. It redirects. And if you're listening to this at night, if the room feels a little quieter than it should, if the time seems heavier than usual, check the clock. If it's close to 2:17, that isn't coincidence. It's synchronization. This story isn't a warning. Warnings try to stop you. This is an introduction. And now that you've reached the end, there's only one thing left for you to notice. The signal didn't end when the story did. It never does. It just waits to see who stays quiet long enough to hear what comes next. I checked the time. 2:16 a.m. The numbers sat there, steady and ordinary, but they carried weight now. Time no longer felt like a measurement, it felt like a threshold. My phone warmed in my hand, the familiar heat spreading slowly across my palm. Not urgent. Not alarming. Just present. the way it always was when the signal was close. I felt calm. Not relieved. Not happy. Aligned. One last message appeared on the screen. Centered. Unadorned. When this ends, you will understand what you helped us measure. There was no countdown. No dramatic shift. The room didn't darken. The air didn't thicken. Instead, the final images arrived quietly. They weren't of cities. They weren't of symbols. They weren't even abstract. They were of people. Listening. Different rooms. Different countries. Different nights. Some sat alone in bedrooms lit only by screens. Some leaned back with headphones on, eyes unfocused. Some stared at nothing in particular, letting the words pass through them without resistance. Cars parked at the side of empty streets. Living rooms long after everyone else had gone to sleep. Dorm rooms. Offices. Kitchens at the edge of morning. Every face held the same expression. Not fear. Not wonder. Attention. That's when the final realization settled into me, not like a shock, but like a truth finally allowed to surface. That was the experiment. Not control. Measurement. How long someone would stay. How deeply they would focus once distractions thinned. How far curiosity could carry them after fear stopped shouting. How silence reshaped listening. The signal never needed obedience. It never needed belief. It never even needed agreement. It needed completion. Finishing the story wasn't passive. It was data. Every second you stayed. Every pause you tolerated. Every unanswered question you carried forward. All of it mattered. The signal didn't test what people thought. It tested whether they stayed present when nothing forced them to. At 2:17 a.m., the clock changed. Nothing dramatic happened. No final message. No closing sound. No confirmation. Just a subtle shift in the way the silence felt less empty, more aware. The images faded, but the understanding remained. The experiment didn't end with the story. It scaled. Because now you know what attention feels like when it isn't stolen. Now you know how quiet the world becomes when you stop rushing to fill it. And that awareness once noticed doesn't go away. I set the phone down. For the first time since this began, I didn't wait for it to light up again. I didn't need to. The signal had what it came for. And if you're still here, if you reached this moment instead of leaving earlier, if you felt that slight stillness settle in just now, then you were part of the measurement too. Not because you believed, but because you stayed. Check the time. If it's close to 2:17, that's not an ending. It's the point where listening becomes a habit. And habits are how signals survive. If you're hearing this part, then you already know something has shifted. Not dramatically. Not visibly. Just enough to notice if you're honest with yourself. You stayed. You stayed through the intermission. Through the quiet stretches. Through the moments where nothing happened and your mind had every excuse to leave. You kept listening because some part of you wanted resolution. That's all the signal has ever looked for. Not belief. Not agreement. Not fear. Continuation. The last thing it showed me wasn't the future. It wasn't power. It wasn't control. It was the beginning. The pressure in my ears. The stillness in the room. The time glowing heavier than it should have. I finally understood what that moment really was. It wasn't the signal announcing itself. It was the signal confirming reception. Everything after that, the symbols, the forum, the voices, the list, wasn't persuasion. It was calibration. A way of measuring how long attention could be held once it had been gently, voluntarily offered. This story ends here. But the pattern doesn't. Because patterns don't need endings. They need repetition. If, just now, you felt a faint pressure. If you glanced at the clock without knowing why. If a quiet part of you wondered whether this was only a story. Don't worry. That reaction is normal. It means the frequency carried. It means the structure worked the way it always does. And if it happens to be close to 2:17 where you are, that isn't a coincidence. It isn't a message either. It's simply the moment when you noticed how quiet things had become. And realized you were still listening. The signal doesn't ask anything more than that. It never has. It just waits to see who pays attention long enough to recognize that listening, once learned, doesn't turn off. And now that you've reached the end, you already know the difference between hearing something and staying with it. That's why this wasn't just a story you listened to. It was something you completed. And completion is all the signal ever needs.